Hello, welcome to another edition of our subseasonal forecast contest on Tuesday, June 1st. We're going to, in terms of today's agenda, we'll start off with the attribution and then we'll get into the forecast. Other than that, and certainly we'll start off with this recent cold and anomalous cold in the eastern parts of the country. But other than that event, are there any other special events or anything in particular that folks want to discuss today? All right, well, just let me know. All right, so yeah, let's, we were just talking offline about the crazy cold weather. I thought this was an interesting highlight on the Rutgers Weather Network. I don't know, I just can't remember the last time anywhere in northern New Jersey or New Jersey had a high temperature this low this late in the season. So I don't know that it's a record. I haven't checked, but 42 degrees on May 29th at the highest point in New Jersey. And Dave, what were you saying in terms of Philadelphia? What was the record there?
Yes, if you just confine it to the final 7 days of May, it was the coldest. Both Saturday and Sunday were the coldest high temps since 1914. There was a few dates back earlier than that were a little colder than the 53 degrees. I think 54 and 53 were the two high temperatures.
Okay. So, yeah.
Been a long time.
Yeah, I mean, and that's just for late May. That's I'd say it's like Chicago weather, but I think it's even worse than Chicago weather. All right, so maybe it starts. So like we said, we'll start with kind of continue talking about this recent event attribution. So the most recent verification was for May 26th to May 30th. So this is the Maxar temperature anomaly map. And, you can see this impressive area of cold or anomalous cold, basically east of the Rockies with a couple exceptions there in the Carolinas and such. And what I also found interesting about this is I was kind of looking at a couple things beforehand. A lot of times actually with Dave, we talk about how, especially as you get into the subseasonal period, it becomes, or like, beyond like 10 or 15 days into the forecast window, another level of difficulty here is timing, right? Because, it's not like you're making a day one, day two forecast. You have to try to account for synoptic variability and things like that. And check out the 5-day period right before this. I'm going to do shift period minus. And so now this is going to be, was it May? Yeah, May 21st, May 25th. So imagine trying to catch this kind of synoptic variability, making I guess, 20 days ago or whatever, this would have been your 11 to 15 day forecast, and then the period we were just looking at would have been your 16 to 20 day forecast, going from, pretty strong warmth, I think, some 90s out in these areas here in the Midwest, Northeast, to, record breaking or near record breaking cold. Maybe Dave, I'm just curious, even before we get past, I know we still have to look at the performance metrics here and stuff like that. But any like initial highlights in terms of what we saw here with this, really extreme variability from, the period before this to this period to even kind of what we're expecting over the next 10, 15 days?
Well, it really feels like that something we've seen since March, really, which is we've seen a tremendous amount of vol in things like the EPO and WPO signals. I think the NAO hasn't had quite that kind of vol. But the realized weather, while it's been kind of warm tilted, if you did a verification back to say March 1st, it's a warm tilted look, but with a lot of volatility. And we've seen these kind of downdrafts of cold, which have tended to really disrupt the verification. Yeah, there it is. Other than the rainy Texas and kind of cool Dallas and just west of there, it's been a warm country. And even more, the month of May, it really took 2 incredibly cold days in the Midwest and East here in the final week to tilt the verification slightly to the cooler side, right? If you take out the last, say, 5 days, we've witnessed, the balance of the country is kind of about average, probably maybe it's slightly warmer than average. But I said not so much. Yeah, through the 26th. The interesting thing about this period, this 5-day window, was while the last 2 days were exceptionally cold in the eastern Midwest and East Coast, it started with a 92-degree day in Philadelphia on Wednesday. That was the day one of verification, and warmth was really holding on quite well to the East Coast. That has actually had been a run since early prior week, where we had 3 days in Philadelphia in the 90s, which is above normal for May, even recent May. And by Friday, obviously, that was slipping badly as the front came through, and the northeast flow kind of really crushed the area from New England south. As that high built across Canada, you had that rainy mess in the Mid Atlantic. But it's just been a volatile spring, even though it's been a slightly tilt to the warm side. I think that's just been a hallmark. If I don't know if that's going to continue or not, there's here we are with another warm surge on the horizon, right? It may not be impactful to our verification coming up, but the next 12 or 13 days in the east look exceptionally warm again. We're going to a spate of days that try to push near 90 in the East Coast. So I guess there's the volatility again, right? We're these few days, yesterday, today, and tomorrow, are coming out of this kind of cold recency look, but back to warm, and not just warm, but very warm, right? There's the ridge that's going to build over. I think you've got day 10, 6 to 10 day Euro. So yeah, hallmark of spring 2021, just a bit higher vol than normal. That's all I really have to say.
Yeah, and I thought, your point about, I was looking at that too. Like, I was looking at the May summary earlier, and I was surprised when when I looked at like the cooling degree days. Yeah, I mean, even with this, what felt like, recency bias, I guess, I don't know, but it felt like it would come in like much cooler than I was expecting. But like, it was ranked 28 of 72 in terms of the coolest. 72 being the coolest, right? Number one being the warmest. So it wasn't even on the cooler side of the distribution here. At 28 of 72, although it was a little bit cooler than the 30-year normal. So yeah, I don't know. All of a sudden I was thinking to myself, boy, with the amount of complaints that I've heard from just my family and close friends about the weather, imagine if we were around during some of these periods in the 50s and 60s, when the CDDs were like these values. Oh my goodness. But maybe that's just me. So what else? Let's see here real quick with this period. Let's go back to the performance. All right, so let's just let's take a we'll sort this by performance here, and Matt Rogers gets a big kudos. So the verification was down here, 23.8 CDDs, just a little bit below the 30-year normal, which is 24.8, and the 10 years close to 29, right? So Matt had a really nice forecast there, almost spot on, and pretty low spread. So you can see why he did so well in terms of the CRPS. Matt Lanza also had a very similar forecast. His spread was just a little bit higher, so he was penalized for that a little bit. Dr. Lupo, who I think is on the line, also did very well with that forecast. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you had folks like me, who, looks like I was kind of waiting a lot on just kind of trend and 10-year normal. And in fact, it looks like I was actually going in the wrong direction there with some sort of fudge factor. Paul Roundy trend and the CFS. I guess the CFS in this case was just I guess spatially. Well, let's pull up the map here. I mean, I guess from a spatial perspective, it did arguably it did very well. The problem was it was just a little bit too cold with 13, 14 CDDs. The EC did pretty well at 22.8. Let's look at the pattern. Yeah, let's look at it. I want to open it up, but let's just look real quick. We'll look at the EC and CFS patterns versus verification. So this is the game we always play, it seems like, or often play, I should say, with the EC and CFS. It's like let's pull it back up. What was it, 26 to 30? So let's look at the spatial representation. You know, I think obviously I'm doing this subjectively, but from a spatial correlation, I don't feel like the EC did better than the CFS. In fact, I think the CFS did better. It's just that, obviously it has a problem at the surface has a bias, right? But if you were looking from like a spatial perspective in terms of which model was on the better track of things, I think you can make a case, again, just visually looking at this, that the CFS actually did a little bit better from that perspective. But
could it also be,
oh, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but the placement of the CFS is further south where there are more CDDs to be had in late May, upstate New York and New England. I don't know if there are any CDDs in the normal, normal maybe zero anyway. So even though it was 15 degrees below normal, doesn't actually change the CDDs in some of those areas.
I think you could be right. Like, the devil could be in the details there a little bit, but those are important details. You're right. I mean, especially this time of year, I think you're absolutely right that the CDDs are still going to be heavily tilted, south of the Mason-Dixon line. So that probably also played a role here. I guess if this big blue area was shifted, a couple hundred miles further north, it'd be interesting to run that exercise to see how much it would have shifted the CDDs. But certainly, I think it would have been, it definitely would have, the CDDs would have been higher, and the spatial pattern would have been spot on. I mean, it would have been spot on. And let's pull up the 500, and let's just look at that. We'll do the global. No, yeah. I don't know. Let's do global first, real quick. I found this pattern interesting. Be like folks comment on that in a second, but let's pull up EC global, and we'll pull up CFS global down here, right? All right, and let's move this over here. All right, so that's the EC, approximately the same period, ridging North Atlantic, or Atlantic anyway, some ridging off the coast, the Pacific. And then let's look at the CFS, still loading. I don't know why it's still loading. Try to load it again. Well, why that's loading, I find, let's go 5 days before, because I was going to say, like, this caught me by surprise too. And I don't know, Dave, Dr. Decker, anyone want to talk about this? Because it's funny, like, again, this is one of those non-intuitive things, at least for me, and looking at this for just a couple minutes, that, I scrolled 5 days before, and this was our super warm pattern in the East, and, you got whatever this pattern in North Atlantic, you got this, jump, a little bit of ridging, but nothing, not a block, right? And then 5 days later, you have this pattern, which is also like a stretched, I don't know what you call this, like almost a zonal pattern. It kind of looks like across, North America, with the trough up here, and Northwest North America, and a trough, in the mid to North Atlantic. And it resulted, of course, in the cold we just talked about. But like, what's going on here? I mean, this is a kind of confusing thing to me. What was the trigger to go from here in warmth to two things? One, cold, but also, like, what forced the cold here? Because this does not look like a traditional kind of cold pattern as we think about it, with like a positive PNA or negative NAO. Anyone have thoughts on this?
Hey, Dave, I'll chime in here real quick. One thing stands out to me about the window 5 days prior is the wave train across Asia that you see. Yeah, this one, which is kind of Central Asian ridging, trough diving into kind of Eastern China, Korea, Sea of Japan, And there's also a hint of a trough around Hawaii, just north of Hawaii. You know, if you just kind of go and bootstrap some old school forecast methodology, you know, that is a pretty good setup for a downstream trough in the eastern United States, you know, 7 to 10 days later, well, 5 to 10 days later, whatever. So, you know, there's a sense of a wave train, which, you know, should amplify a trough eventually in the east. What are you showing us there, Dave?
Sorry, I'm just going day to day. So that,
Okay.
okay.
Yeah, pretty vigorous trough going through Asia. You know, some people were keying off that. I have some notes here, which some folks I follow pretty closely had mentioned that the troughs driving through Northeast China and Japan as being a potential precursor for troughiness late month in the east. The other thing I'd have to key on is maybe look at the precipitation pattern over the eastern half of the country this past 5-day window, because oftentimes in May, you know, cold is associated with rain. And obviously it was for this weekend in the east, but I haven't looked at that yet, but that's one thing that I guess I'd be curious about.
Yeah, I was going to mention, I thought it was awfully cloudy in the east over this period, and with the amount of solar radiation that typically comes in when you have the clouds, especially this time of the year.
That's absolutely right. Yeah. So is that the Dave's going to show us here?
So this is the 20. Yeah, this is our verification period.
That matches up really well with, you know, where the cold was located. You know, anything from the Texas Panhandle to the East Coast has been pretty cold, and a lot of it was precipitation.
It's is this, you know, again, going back, not to belabor this point, but so this, it's this little chew ball that came down. Let's see here. So going back to the 500. So here's the 25th. I'll go to the 26th. Might be a little delay. There's 26 on my screen. 27th. There is a lot of action, like Dave was talking about, over Asia. A lot of troughing over Asia. And then it's almost like, yeah, didn't we have like a little coastal low here? Look at this big trough, but then this, you know, more short wave. This is 28th. So that was what was that, Saturday?
Friday, Dave.
Friday. Okay, Friday. And then here, okay, here's where, yeah, you know what hit the fan. Yeah, and then it's like it is interesting that it's almost like a full latitude. It just comes really far south, right, for this time of year. There's the 30th, so that's, I guess, Sunday, Monday, and that's it. That's boy, that's hard. I mean, you know, if you're using teleconnections to forecast, you know, the medium range, boy, oh boy, this one would be probably not be on the radar, so to speak. I don't know. Is there, boy, I guess, I don't know, Dr. Lupo, I think you're on the line here, and you did quite well in this forecast. Do you have any, or maybe you typed a few things here too, let me see. But I was going to ask you, I'll read what you have here. This is Dr. Lupo, actually. Out here, yeah, carbon copy of 2020, warm March, that was from earlier. We keyed on that as well.
Yeah, I was mentioning that we keyed in on the strong troughing over East Asia that that was mentioned in the discussion.
I see.
And let's see let me remind myself what our forecast was here. There was 26. Yes, that Bering Sea type rule with the strong troughs over East Asia leading to troughs in the east. Looked at our CPC analogs, teleconnections, and it seemed that blocking was not, or was at least beginning to lighten up toward the middle of May, and we thought that might continue toward the end of May. But that was the basis of our forecast. I
Yeah,
was,
you were pretty definitive here in your strategy statement here, Dr. Lupo. All of our methods are showing below normal CDDs, centered in the South and Midwest.
yeah, right. And, I think Joe is a little bolder when he goes to forecast, so that 26 may reflect my reticence a little bit. I can't remember what was the normal for this period.
This period, it was, well, the 10-year was 28.8 and the 30-year was 24.8.
Okay, so yeah, we were at least directionally on the ball there,
Oh,
and
yeah.
but Joe likes to go a little lower, and he advocates to go a little lower, and I'm a little more reticent about extreme events. Uh, like we saw this weekend, it was a fairly extreme blast of cold air. It wasn't quite as bad in the Midwest as the East, but it still was the coldest in almost 30 years. So
Yeah. Yeah, that was impressive. So, um, so a lot of variability. Certainly, I've heard here a lot of one of the takeaways, and it seems like, as Dave was saying earlier, we still have a lot more. It appears more variability coming if these, if these even 6 to 10 day models are right. Right, this looks like a pretty darn warm period here from the Midwest into the Northeast. So back and forth we go. Is there before we switch gears into the forecast? I know we talked about this over the last week or two, and our conclusion was that not yet, but um, is what we're seeing here. And I don't know if this is a question for Dave or anyone else, but from a market perspective or from an actual, more scientific perspective here, is any of this variability, indicative of things that we're likely to continue to expect in June, July? Or I think where we left off last time, it was, May is May and don't use May to predict the rest of the summer. Anyone have thoughts on that?
So Dave, that's true. May is May, and really shows very little to no correlation to summer. Doesn't even show a correlation to June, for that matter, at least in the eastern United States. I guess the volatility question is an interesting one. It's like something I haven't probed into yet, but I'm curious as to, is it volatility versus, say, the 30 or even 50-year normal? Maybe it isn't. Maybe this is, is similar to periods we've had in the past. So I don't know if I can answer that from a science question without kind of looking at some data and seeing maybe where has volatility been, and trying to measure that over the past, say, decade or two versus the prior 30 or 40 years. From a market perspective, I can comment that the market seems to be shaking off these cold episodes pretty well, and any hints of heat seem to be much more impactful. And the heat is, even though it's coming in relatively short bursts, the fact that there's heat in the forecast, or we've experienced it like we had, for the 5 days prior to this cold event, the market is seeing enough heat to at least have put a floor in, it seems. But I'm not saying it's exclusively weather related, right? Frequently this time of year, a lot of market moves are on other supply questions and other factors not related to the immediate short-term weather. So it does seem like, though, at least from what we can glean as far as weather's impact to the market, that the fact that we're still seeing some heat, and actually in some cases quite strong, still seems to be buoying the market a little. Now there's a pretty good headwind, and that headwind is Texas is cold, and without Texas demand, particularly in the summer, that is going to become an increasing headwind as we go through June. We really have a lot of natural gas demand for power consumption in the state of Texas, really all of the South Central U.S. So without a contribution from Texas, I think we not only maybe we've put a floor in, but we maybe start putting a ceiling in on where this market can go. Right, it's been a long time since we've had a cold Texas, warm, arc from the Rockies to the Northeast. So we don't have a lot of any recent patterns in the past 5 or so years to reflect on that. But it seems like that the lack of Texas heat will become a bigger issue. Should become a bigger issue. Thanks.
I think one thing you said there, I often think about this. I don't know, like I would love to see more. I'm sure there's some out there, but I'd love to see some more basic analysis on kind of detailing how variable the pattern actually is versus historical, some historical period, and defining variability. I know you could define variability a lot of ways. Just in terms of like the synoptic variability we're seeing, say, over the last month. With we saw the trough, or we saw the warmth. 10 days ago, the cold, the last 5 days, so on and so forth. How has that sort of synoptic variability been compared to normal over the past month? And I bring this up because I think there's so much, I worry. It's something that's talked about a lot, not just, I think, from a your friend, family perspective. It's kind of sometimes talked about in the news, like, sometimes linked to climate change. And by the way, I'm not trying to make this political at all. I'm just trying to understand factually. But I think there's so much. I know with Dave and I talk about this a lot, like in the industry, there's so much recency bias, right? And in forecasting and performance and things like that. And I think I suspect also with variability, where you get one period that goes cold to warm or something like that, and it's like, oh my God, it's like so variable, and it's never been like this, and then I don't remember it ever being like that. But we know our sometimes that's a bias, right? That's a human emotion and stuff like that. And so I would love to do some more, if anyone has this or has access to this or seen it, like a little bit more on tracking real time variability in terms of the pattern, and variability, like in terms of the temperature swings and stuff like that. Is it really unusual, or is it just that it feels unusual because it's the first time it's happened? It's happening in the last few weeks, and that's what we remember. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that area. Curious.
Yeah, Dave, I'll second it. I know you mentioned my name, and we have discussed this. I think this is a really rich research area for the industry in general, not just the energy commodity space, but also for just a broader, public consumption space. The context is very important, and I think that the examining volatility of patterns of old compared to patterns that we're seeing presently has really a lot of value in terms of framing the discussion, depending on what the discussion is. We do know certain things, right? We recognize that we don't see there's magnitude of like Arctic high pressures that come south, right? Like if you look at this extreme cold of February 2021, right? It was supported by like a 55 Arctic high in the Dakotas, but patterns of old would have seen 1065 or 1070 in the upper Midwest and southern Canada. So we're not seeing that. We get the sense that there's climate trends here, but I agree with you. There's a separate question here, which is regarding the volatility of patterns. They may be warmer patterns, or they may be patterns that have a less active blocking regime in one area of the globe versus another. But it'd be nice to examine that. The data's there. I think it's more of coming up with a rather objective methodology to measure that volatility and provide some scaffolding around it. But I know from my perspective, I think that'd be really valuable research to participate in or collaborate on.
Yeah. Again, just to separate the recency bias so that we can, because again, I look at some of these tables here and I think to myself, my goodness, if we actually had one of these events, what would people be saying? And then go, but then again, maybe during some of these periods, the variability, obviously it was colder, but there was less warmth there, and so the volatility was, it was less. So I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Obviously, I think there is a perception or a view that we are in a general period of greater volatility, But again, I just
Oh.
haven't seen, I feel like I haven't seen a lot of the data on that subject, and I would love to see more of it, especially specific to, our US bias here, United States, Midwest, Northeast, things like that.
I think that'd make a great study project for a master's thesis or something like that. I don't recall seeing articles like that, but maybe if we scan around the journals, we might find them. But back to the question of whether this variability will continue, at least our studies suggest that for the Midwest out here, by late May, anywhere from late May to late June, this springtime volatility will shut off. And then the summer will go into a much less variable pattern out here. And we kind of expect that to be the case again this year. I think we find that the average date for the shutoff of that springtime variability is around June 10th out here. So I think we'll be into the summer regime for this next forecast, and I'd expect I'm still on board with a hot summer, so. Or a warmer.
Yeah.
summer.
And on that note, I think that's kind of you're in terms of the lack of relationship between May, or at least getting into early, in particular mid-May and June. I think that's consistent sort of with Dave's view too.
Yep.
And frankly, that's, I think, things that I've been consistent with my sort of thinking too. And I think there's something there, right? In terms of, you're still in May is still, I think, part of that transition season, right? If you had to generalize March, April, May, kind of that,
Yep.
Coming out of winter into spring and then coming out of spring into summer. And so I suspect that there's some more, objective evidence there to support that. Again, just because you're in a wild May does not necessarily mean we're going to have a wild June, July, August. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. Okay. All right. I guess, let's switch gears. We'll talk a little bit about the forecast. We can't avoid the forecast. But let's see. All right. So today is June 1st. So we're forecasting out to mid-June. So it'll definitely be an interesting verification to see how this all plays out. I'll just give you the highlights here. So the warmest forecast are some of the short-term averages here. You can see in the mid 40s trend, mid and upper 40s. The 10-year normal is about 45. Dr. Lupo looks like is in his group is the warmest or hottest human forecast, 45. And then just behind that is Maxar and me, Dr. Decker. And then on the lower end, we've got, the CFS at 38. The persistence, not surprisingly, the persistence, especially the 5-day persistence, which is basically, it's just progressing forward, what just the 5 days that just verified, and using that to predict the 16 to 20. So obviously that's going to be cool. And then Josh Herman is pretty cool here. And it looks like Michael, in terms of human forecasts, other than Josh and on the line, is one of the cooler forecasts. Let's just look real quick at the where's the EC is at 40 or 41, and the CFS is at 38. Let's look at their upper air patterns real quick to see if there's anything interesting there in terms of differences. So there's a CFS. All right, so who wants to open it up and tell us about the forecast process?
I can start since it's probably the simplest. As always, looking at the CPC forecast, they have a mix of warmth and cool in their forecasts, but the area of warmth, even the probabilities are not that high in much of that area of above normal, but it is a large area and lots of population. So I did go slightly above normal for my CDDs based on that map. In their discussion, CPC noted a lot of basically the low confidence in that forecast. So I also bumped up my sigma. There's a lot of disagreement in the various tools that they use. So my sigma is a little higher, and my CDDs are also slightly above the normal.
Any questions for Dr. Decker? So keeping Texas cool, as Dave Darkangel was talking about a little bit. Did they mention that the Texas cool was, also related to, the precip and things like that, or was it more just a pattern issue in Texas?
I think they got that specific. But I mean, they talk about, more broadly than Texas. They do talk about the high observed soil moisture. And so that's partially related to that. So not just Texas, but the broader region is sort of cooler for that reason.
Right. Okay. Let's see. Michael, would you like to give us your?
Yeah. So I started off with my 10-year Euro blend, started out at 44.03. And took a look at the teleconnections, didn't see a clear pattern there. All seemed to be floating around the neutral area towards our period. So I didn't make any changes based on the teleconnections, especially also considering I think we're late enough into the year where the teleconnections aren't really a big player anymore, really. Other than a really strong signal, which obviously wasn't there. So didn't do any changes on that. And I actually decreased my value based on the CPC forecast. I kind of took a different interpretation on that than Dr. Decker did. I kind of ignored any of the slightly above average areas. So if you take a look at the CPC map real quick. So yeah, anything that was between the 55 and 50, I kind of said, well, that's probably not going to be anything spectacular in terms of warmth. And I kind of weighted a little bit more heavily the south coolness, because there is a 60% in there. And if that entire area, and you kind of not hard to imagine that 60% kind of edging its way towards, I guess, Dallas. I think that's more central Texas, if I'm not mistaken. Could lose a lot of CDDs there. So, and the biggest area of warmth was the West Coast, and there's not really a lot of people in that 60% circle. So I kind of took it as a cooler signal and lowered my value by 1.5 CDDs based off of this, and wound up with 42.5 with average spread.
Thank you, Michael. Any questions for Michael? I do have a question, Michael. Again, if I was wearing my end user hat here, I felt like I wasn't sure if this is a contradiction or what.
Yeah, I see where you're going. The second you started to highlight it, I knew exactly where you're going with the question. I need to, I think in the next week, I'm going to change up my formula to account for that, because right now I haven't, the last couple of weeks, I haven't really been able to use the teleconnections reliably for anything. It's always showed around neutral when I'm making the forecast. So I'm gonna change that so I don't. But yeah, so obviously that shouldn't say 50% teleconnections if I didn't really use the teleconnections to change my forecast.
Right. Thanks. That's helpful. And if anyone didn't catch that, Michael had said earlier that he was putting a lot, less weight on teleconnections. So I was like, okay, that's fine. But then he said here that he's putting, 50% of his weight, right? And so, obviously our goal here is to be kind of consistent with this. So no, that's helpful. All right, thanks, Michael. Let's see. All right, who would like to go next? Dave, you want to talk about your forecast, sir?
Dave had to drop.
Oh, he had to drop. Sorry. Let's see. Who hasn't got Dr. Lupo? Would you like to talk about your forecast process?
Yeah, like as mentioned before, we weren't seeing very strong signals in the teleconnections or the analogs for that matter. The forecasts kind of nudged the two of us to go a little cooler than what is it, the 10-year, I believe. We were on the cooler side of that, but on the warmer side of the 30-year. And that's in keeping with the idea that we're kind of expecting the summer to be a little warmer than normal. And again, the models nudged us a little lower. Joe, again, tried to convince me to go a little lower than we did, but we stuck with the 45.
Okay. Any questions for Dr. Lupo?
Let me add that our past analogs, based on where we are within the ENSO cycle, also suggested a little warmer. So,
and actually, I'm curious. Where do you think we are exactly? Like, how would you define us in that ENSO cycle?
well, we're nudging toward. Right now, we're leaving the La Nina, but we're nudging toward the neutral, but we still haven't gotten on the warm side of that. And at least out here, the statistics show that, following La Nina, strong La Nina events and or even weak ones, if the flow remains on the cold side of neutral, you tend to be warmer.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. Any other questions or any questions for Dr. Lupo? Okay. Let's see. In terms of my formula, actually, I realize I have to change one thing here. I screwed something up, but my number was close to 45, similar to Dr. Lupo's. My spread was pretty much normal. I just took I put most of my weight on the 30-year and a slight weight on the 10-year. That's kind of normally what I do if I don't have a strong view. So it was about 7.5, just a little bit less than 8. And in terms of my formula, this fudge factor is not correct. I didn't use a fudge factor. I just forgot to delete it. But I used kind of the weighting scheme you see here. Still putting more significant weight on like shorter year normal periods and like trend as a function of the fact that we're moving into June, July, August, where I think that's the strongest signal. A little bit of weight on the ECCFS. I did give some thought to what to do with the MJO and if there should be an MJO fudge factor here, so to speak. Ultimately, I didn't do anything, but so the MGO, we've got this signal here. It dipped a little bit, but now it's come back out to phase 6. Here's kind of the forecast over the next week or two. It's expected to, kind of come a little higher, increase in amplitude for a few days, and then decrease in amplitude after that. It seems to me, there's definitely, it seems like there's some interference here, and you could kind of see it when you look at the velocity potential charts here, where you have this one area that I guess is triggering or the more of the phase 6 signal, out here just west of the date line. But then it looks like, you have a signal out here in the Atlantic Ocean. So definitely it appears anyway, like there's some interference here. And of course, I don't know exactly how that's going to play out. But the reason why it caught my attention, it's similar to last week, was when we look at at least this, MJO, where did I put it? Over here. Our MJO sort of phase tool, there's at the 16 to 20 day period, the strongest cold signal is, and it appears to be a pretty significant cold signal, is out here. Now, obviously, we're more out here, so we're not. It's sort of a neutral signal, is how I saw it. But I was thinking, like, obviously, there's some sensitivities here if the signal moves further west or what have you. But ultimately, I did not see a clear signal from the MGO based on what we were seeing here. And so I didn't factor it in. The only other thing I want to say was, again, this is one of those, this is almost more back to the attribution and post-mortem. Obviously, here's what evolved, what's this, over the past couple weeks. And again, this was our chart here. We didn't reach any kind of amplitude up here in the verification in the observed MJO index. But I do wonder here if there was any relationship between things that were going on with the MJO signal as it was moving across phases 4, 5, and 6 over the past couple of weeks, and the cool weather. But at the end of the day, I don't know. I just figured I'd just bring that up. But in terms of my map, this was my map. It's a pretty non-committal map here. I just didn't see a strong signal east of the Rockies, and I kept things slightly above normal for the Intermountain West. Those are my thoughts. Right. Well, we have a few minutes here, and we don't have to use the entire time. But does anyone have any other general, questions or comments that they want to discuss here in the last few minutes?
Can you show that MJO map again?
No. Yes, I will. This one?
No, the Australian Bureau of Meteorology page.
Oh, sure. This one?
Yeah, since this looks different from what I'm seeing on the CPC page, which looks more like the signal should be in phase 7 rather than phase 6. I'm not sure if that's a discrepancy by the way the values are being calculated, or.
Oh yeah, yeah. You, Mr. Eagle Eye over here. No, that's true. I think you're saying that here, May 30th. It's on the. It's just inside of the border of phase 6, and then it always blocks my. Sorry, the Zoom, that little drop down window. And then on the forecast, these dynamic forecasts, it's just inside phase 7. Is that what you're kind of talking about?
Yeah, and then if you look at today, or if you look at the other things on the CPC site for 31st, the signal actually moved farther to the left, so it's farther into phase 7. So when I was making my forecast, I was basing it off phase 7 rather than phase 6.
Yeah, so I'll tell you what I know about this, and anyone else is willing to chime in. So they're not. The bottom line is they're not calibrated perfectly, right? Okay. So the data from the Aussie, is a different data set, right, than what CPC uses in order to produce these dynamic forecasts, right? And so because they have a different observation data set, winds, OLR, whatever, to actually create these EOFs, I've seen this consistently for many years, that they are not exactly in phase, that there usually is a slight difference in terms of this. And what I've done in terms of, because again, they're different agencies, again, they use different data, and that's what they do, right? Now we use, just FYI, if you're using our MJO phase tool, like the one I just showed, we just use Aussie data, the data from the Aussie site, right? So it's going to be, and it's going to be a function of where you see the MJO in the Aussie diagram. So in this case, it's phase 6. So in other words, if you're using this chart and saying, hey, how should I, you know, or if you're using the index that we actually create from this, the forecast, it's all based on the Australian data, because that's the one that has the historical data set that we use to create those sort of empirical, you know, information. But yeah, I mean, I think you have to kind of bias correct a little bit if you're kind of splicing the two of those data sets kind of together.
Mhm. I see.
Yeah, this is CPC, so it's a, you know, different group. So anyone else have any thoughts on that or anything else before we call it? Okay, well, and Philip, I don't know if you heard, but we talked a lot about, when did you jump on?
I actually jumped on pretty early.
Oh, okay, so you heard, I was going to say, if you didn't hear that whole thing about volatility, because
Uh-huh.
I know, you know, just, you know, in the future, if you have any ideas on that kind of study, or if you come across, if anyone
Mhm.
online, you know, comes across some, you know, some research that they want to share, please just, you know, send it over, and we'll make sure to cover it in a future discussion, and, you know, we'll add it somewhere on the website so other folks can see it.
Okay.
Cool. All right, well, thanks everyone, have a good week, and we'll do it again next week.
Bye, everyone.
Okay.
All right. See ya.
Bye, guys.
Thanks. Have a good
Bye.
week.
Thank
Bye.
you too.